And there it is. We got the first college football playoff selection committee rankings on Tuesday night, election night. I didn't enjoy that election theme. As a matter of fact, if you want an election theme for your broadcast, you could go watch, not a football show. Nobody asked for that. Nobody needed that. Outside of that, I did enjoy very much getting to the top 25 as quickly as we possibly can, finding out where the teams are ranked, and then finding out what work needs to be done, if any, to get into the 12-team dance. And I appreciate what this is setting up for, right? So there are a couple of things that I wanted to get away, talk through as I'm writing these things down a little bit later on. Number one is Colorado enters the College Football Playoff Selection Committee rankings for the first time in the prime era. They're at number 20 as it stands right now. And that means that we got to talk about Colorado entering the national title race in earnest for the first time in the CFP era. They were ranked in the 2016 rankings at the end, just outside of what we might think of as, the first four teams. Like at number 8, they were 1 point, and then they dropped to number 10. I think that this is a program that at that time might have gotten into the college football playoff, right? I really have to go take a look at the game-by-game results, where they ended up in the Pac-12, figure that out. But now that we're at 12 teams, you can see a road through for Prime in Colorado to the national championship game. So with the losses to Iowa State and Kansas State, taken by, Texas Tech and Houston, the Buffaloes at 6-2 and 4-1 in the conference sit tied at number 2 with Iowa State in the Big 12. That means that not only is Prime's Buffalo eligible for a bowl for the first time in his era, it also has a definitive path to the college football playoff with what I think is the Heisman Trophy winner in Travis Hunter, who 100% affects winning. With just one game left against a team with a winning record right now in Texas Tech, you can see them charting a path to the Big 12 championship. So on the road against Texas Tech at Jones with the Tortillas and the Matador, that's a tough environment, and they're going to have to earn it every step of the way. That place is really tough to play in. But you get past Texas Tech, who's at 6-3. You got Utah, who's at 4-4. They got the backup quarterback and Isaac Wilson in. Kansas, who's just been abysmal at 2-6. Oklahoma State at 3-6. Mike Gundy, the best he can do is tell people that they're poor and they're broke, and that's why his football team sucks. I think that Colorado could win all of those games. And then we're looking at Colorado being 10-2, no matter what. And is that one of the 12 best teams in college football? That would be one of the interesting questions to ask as we're getting there. But if they went out and Iowa State takes a loss to Kansas State at the end of the season, we are talking about Colorado playing BYU for the Big 12 championship. That's not a small thing. That's never going to be a small thing. That's always going to be an enormous thing. As I am taking a look at what the Big 12 has represented in this season, we think that it is going to be the least ranked of the 4 highest ranked Power 4 conference champions that we think are going to get the, 4 bid spots where you get the bye week, right? Where you get to wait for the first round of games and then you get to go play. So do you really want to be in that 4 spot? No. I think that's the worst spot in college football's playoff this year. You don't want to be in the 4 spot. That BYU is undefeated in the 4 spot, as we have other teams with losses like Georgia and Ohio State ahead of them. It's just not going to make you feel good. That said, BYU is in the midst of its best season since 2020 when Zach Wilson was quarterback there, and they look for everybody like they're going to win the Big 12 championship. Like what they did at Kansas State was no fluke, 38-7. They have a great win against the number 13 team in the country in Southern Methodist. And if you are actually paying attention, yeah, BYU should be ranked again ahead of Indiana based on its strength of record. Though Indiana, for me, looks a lot like what we expected Clemson to be like during that 2015 to 2020-ish run, 2019 run, where it felt like they weren't playing anybody, and then they showed up in the college football playoff and handed people their heads. But sticking with Colorado for just a second here, think about this. You got Shedeur Sanders, you got Travis Hunter, and then you got Parts. And by Parts, I mean dudes that have absolutely leveled up the Colorado game from this year to last year. And I really wish that this year's team was last year's team, because people aren't watching as much Colorado as they were last year, but they're still watching a lot of Colorado. And I think they're going to watch even more if this team continues to win. But the Parts, from Will Shepard to Shiloh Sanders, you've got guys out there that are making plays in a way that they need to for this team to win. The defense has been drastically improved. The offensive line has gotten better with the addition of Jordan Seaton and moving off a bunch of those guys that you once had into your program that were unable to keep Shedeur Sanders upright, got the man sacked 50 times, and got his vertebrae broken. Now we're talking about a Colorado that people are coming around to is really good in all three phases, right? They can kick the ball when they need to. They can return kicks when they need to. And you got Travis Hunter, who is on pace to be, I think one of the legendary college football players in our sport. Along with Jeremiah Smith, this is a great season for college football and a great season to have the 12-team playoff. For Colorado, though, you need to keep your eye on the ball. For Colorado, you're coming out of a bye week where a lot of things broke for you. It doesn't break like this for a lot of people during their bye week. You can see your chance to go out the window. As a matter of fact, it's not uncommon to see a program get docked in a week where they didn't play football because somebody else did and somebody else looked better. That didn't happen to Colorado with the losses for Iowa State and Kansas State. They moved up. And now we're looking at a Colorado program that, if they get a win this weekend, could chart themselves into the top 15 just after getting that win on the road against what we know is a good Texas Tech team, and a Texas Tech team that's going to be up for them. In as far as Prime is concerned, you got to keep the blinders on. Like I have said for some time now, that I don't know that Colorado has played well inside the spotlight. Outside the spotlight, they've been great. To the point about primetime television, yeah, there's primetime television. There's playing on ESPN. There's playing on ESPN2. There's playing on FS1. There's playing on Fox. There's playing on on ABC. But frequently, the last few weeks, that's not been the game that people are focused on, right? People are focused on other bigger games that are happening in the SEC or the Big Ten at night. So you're not necessarily just laser focused on the Big 12. Plus, the Big 12's been playing some games after 9 o'clock Central Standard Time, which is like 10 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. So a lot of the folks that purport to be, they want you to believe they're college football fans, they're not up. They're not watching. I actually was really kind of pissed that this weekend we got daylight saving time. There aren't any late college football games. It's like, this is the perfect time to have it. We all get the hour back. Give us the late college football. But now we know Colorado games are going to be seen. I would be shocked to see if they play a game that is not on a big-time broadcast network. I would be shocked to find out they don't play on Fox or ESPN or FS1 the rest of the way, because they have earned that, right? Being 6-2 and being one of those teams that is playing for an opportunity to compete in the Big 12 championship in their first season. Tremendous for them. Remarkable for them. I'm excited to see what it is that they can do the rest of the way and whether or not they're going to answer the call. Like, you got to go undefeated for the month of November, what we used to call Championship November. Let's see if there's some championship in Colorado's get down in Buffalo, in Boulder, right? And let's see if they can't turn that momentum into not just wins on the football field, but wins in the offseason, as they're in a race right now to win Juju Lewis, I think. He's committed to USC. USC is cheeks. USC is going to a backup quarterback, probably signaling to Julian Lewis that, hey, we might have some room for you. But Lincoln Riley has shown that if you show him that you can play at the late part of the year, he's willing to give you the job, like he did with Miller Moss last year before he benched him today. Maybe that's Jaden Mayava. Julian Lewis also headed to Indiana this weekend for Indiana-Michigan, and that's a huge game. And Indiana is in a much better spot than either one of those programs. And Kurt Cignetti, all he's done is win since he got there. You need to put something down on paper that says, yes, Juju, this is the place for you to be with Shedeur Sanders absolutely going to the NFL next year. I've really kind of enjoyed this conversation that people were having not here about Shedeur Sanders coming back in 2025. And I'm like, for what? For who? For how? He was asked, like, did you enroll in classes in the spring? And he says, classes? I'm going to league. What do I need to enroll in classes for? There's your answer. He's not sticking around. And that'll answer some questions about what Prime is going to do, right? The thing about coaches telling me or telling you or telling us that they're going to stay where they are is it's good right up until the point that it's not. You know, you'd be a fool to just expect him to stay at Colorado because he just says so. We see coaches move all the time for various reasons. After claiming that they wouldn't, Jed Fish at Arizona, he said, I'm not leaving Arizona. A couple days later, he's in Washington. So when we come around to the coaching carousel and there's no movement, cool. Prime gets to say, I kept my word. It's great. But I'm saying until we see that coaching carousel come and go, I'm not at all sold that Prime is going to be in Colorado, because that's not traditionally how it has gone for coaches that have really great seasons. He wins 10 games at Colorado. There's going to be a lot of people that are asking, do you really want to stay there? Because we got a job over here that we think is more attractive to you and what you might be able to provide for us. The next thing that I wanted to talk about is, frankly, what Indiana has done. Indiana has proven to be the most unlikely or likely college football playoff team, depending on how you want to look at it. But they are even more unlikely than BYU for me. BYU has won a national championship. BYU has a Heisman winner. BYU won 11 games just 4 years ago in 2020. Indiana ain't done none of that. They ain't never been there, right? They're 9-0 for the first time in history, which means they win 10 games, 10th game coming against a Michigan team that traditionally whoops their behind. They get to 10 wins for the first time in school history, and they'll be 10-0. That's remarkable. They're as good offensively as they are defensively. The problem that you run into is that they haven't played anybody with a ranking next to their name, and that is really going to be defining their season up until they get to Ohio State. You beat the snot out of Nebraska that pushed Ohio State into the deep water. That looks good for you. You beat the snot out of Michigan State 47-10. Well, that's a program that Ohio State beat 38-7, and a program that not Ohio State, Oregon beat 31-10, and you won by 37, right? That's a ridiculous margin. You got Curtis Rourke back, who we think affects winning for you, but Taven Jackson looked good, and your defense is playing lights out, and Kurt Cignetti knows how to win. I think as we're looking at the Hoosier Daddies being 9-0 and getting into the ranking for the first time since 2020, they've also achieved their highest ever ranking in the college football playoff era in its initial ranking in week 11, where they're at number 8. They've never been higher than number 11, which is really remarkable. But you take into account what they have done to people, and it ain't been close. This is why I compared them to Clemson in 2015 or 2018. They won every game they played by 14 points or more. They have beaten Big Ten teams by scores of 29, 37, and 49 points. That's the difference, right? They have 2 of those 3 wins on the road. Like, they went down to UCLA and handed them their head. Same UCLA that beat up on Nebraska, right? Same Nebraska that they stomped a mud hole in and walked it dry. So they're exactly where they were in the AP ranking. I have them at number 6. I'm higher on Indiana than some, but I'm willing to go with this because we got college football left to play. They're also the 3rd best team in the Big Ten. That might have a lot to do with how they get in, where they get in, because you know that 1 and 2, Oregon and Ohio State, can't stay there if they play in a Big Ten championship, because one of those is probably going to fall to that 5 spot, which I'll talk about here in a little bit. But barring a disastrous loss for IU or Ohio State for that matter, that matchup will define what this program or what these programs are going to do on December 4th. If Ohio State beats Indiana, and Indiana's got the 1 loss, but they're 11-1, do you put them in there ahead of a Penn State? Do you put them in there ahead of a Tennessee? Do you put them in there ahead of a Alabama, a Notre Dame? It's an interesting discussion because Notre Dame's loss is bad. It's to Northern Illinois, right? They've also beaten some really great teams. Alabama's got 2 losses, right? You've got the one to Vanderbilt, and they're not in your college football playoff selection committee top 25. Hello? Like, I don't know how you leave Vanderbilt out of this thing, but that doesn't help Alabama in the least. And then you got the loss to Tennessee, and Tennessee is clinging to the loss to Arkansas, among other things. And then say nothing of Ole Miss is playing for its life like LSU and Alabama for the rest of, well, at least through this weekend, right? You got to beat Georgia, which is a tall task. If they beat Georgia, it's really hard to put a 3-loss Georgia into the college football playoff, and that will really upset these rankings. And then we'll have some real math to do. But that's getting a little bit ahead of it. I'm still focused on Indiana get past Michigan because on the one hand, you know that you ought to beat them like they stole something. You should walk them down. On the other hand, you're 10 and 58 against them. They have whooped you way more times than you have whooped them. And either you're going to ignore that maize and blue and come out there and beat IU, or you're not. And I think that's psychological. And we'll get an answer to that very quickly. I think that this team is built to make a run toward the college football playoff, and I would be shocked if they're not in it, regardless of what Penn State does, regardless of what Notre Dame does, regardless of what Alabama does. I think that IU will be there at the end in the college football playoff, and that's really fun for all of us, quite frankly. The third thing I wanted to make a mention of, well, let me stick with this for just a second. Let me walk this out just a little bit further. If you're Oregon, you have no excuse. You need to win every game you play all the way through. I don't care that Tez Johnson is not there. If you're Ohio State, you have no excuse. You're going to play the worst team in the Big Ten this weekend in Purdue. As a matter of fact, if the starters are not out after the first series of the third quarter, I'm going to say this select committee, this group of suits in a boardroom in Grapevine, Texas, at a resort, is going to find a reason to say that Ohio State's not that good. But they know what the roster is, and they know how much was spent on the roster, and they love a good roster. We know this because they took it out on Florida State when they lost Jordan Travis. So at the top, there's really not room for error here, because if Ohio State takes a loss to Indiana, I don't see them getting in the college football playoff. By this measure, I think I would still have them one of the 12 best teams in the sport, but I'm not sure that the selection committee would. I don't know that they would give them the benefit of the doubt. I know that they've been giving it to some, but it doesn't feel like they're going to give it to them because the schedule just hasn't panned out for them. That said, they got to win against a team that they rank at number 6 in Penn State on the road, so that might be enough. So could you see 4 teams from the Big Ten get into this thing? It's possible, right? If Penn State wins out, Indiana and Ohio State will do what they do, but they get to, let's say Ohio State's 11-1. Let's say Penn State's 11-1. If Ohio State makes the Big Ten championship, I don't know how you're going to leave them out. Oregon, they lose the Big Ten championship. I don't know how you're going to leave them out. So we could see 4 teams from the Big Ten into the college football playoff, and I don't think that would shock anybody. No, Soldier, this is not pre-recorded. It's live. I don't live pre-recorded. Like that's garbage. No, if I'm doing it, I'm doing it. But bear that in mind as we continue to go through this thing, because I'm looking at the SEC, whose highest ranked team, by the way, is Georgia at number 3, then Texas at 5, then Tennessee at 7, and then Alabama at 11. So that's only 3 teams in the top 10 for the SEC, whereas, we got 4 from the Big Ten in here. I've always thought that the selection committee would go into this thing believing that the SEC is the deeper league, is the better league, and it doesn't seem like they feel that way. They feel that the Big Ten is the deeper league, is the better league. That helps Indiana, and it hurts Alabama. Like, Alabama takes a loss against LSU, it's over. It's just over. If LSU gets a win, I'm not necessarily sure that they're going to stay in this thing, but they do have a road to the SEC championship, and that's going to help them. They went out, they're getting in, right? I think the one that kind of caught me off guard there was Georgia being at 3. I thought they would have them at 2, with the win on the road to Texas meaning a lot more than perhaps the win for Ohio State against Penn State, because I think we all believe that Penn State is not as good as Texas. And so do they, right? Texas at number 5, Penn State at number 6. I think it's just the distance from that, because they watched Ohio State beat Penn State last week, and it's been a couple of weeks since we last saw Texas get a beating from Georgia at home at night. I think that part I would have flipped, right? I don't know. I think that the win on the road for Georgia was really demonstrative from the standpoint of their defense. If that defense that we saw against Texas shows up to play in the college football playoff, it's over. Like, that defense is amazing. I'm not sure that Ohio State or Oregon has something that can stop it. That said, I would love to see that game. I think that game would be outstanding, and I'm here to be wrong about that. That would be great. The third thing I wanted to point out here is that the number 5 seed continues to be the best seed at the college football playoff table. And right now, that's Texas. I would want the number 5 seed before I want any other seed in college football, and I've been loud about this from the very beginning. So when you hear other folks say it, you can take it back to September, man. I've been saying for some time, I want to be number 5. This is the first year of the college football playoff, which is important because it means that as the number 5 seed, you get the opportunity to host the first home game in postseason history, period. And it's against the number 12 team, which in this case is Boise State. So at this point, we're talking about a 5 seed getting the 12 seed that is Boise State, right? So Boise State goes to Texas. Good grief, man. Do you expect Boise State to win that game? I don't. I don't care how good or bad you think Quinn Ewers is. Ashton Jeanty has not looked like the guy in the second half that he did in the first half. He rushed for 1,200 yards in the first half of the season. The next 2 games, he hasn't busted more than 150. He just ain't been that guy. He's going to need a couple of 300-yard games, 400-yard games if he wants to pass Barry Sanders for the most rushing yards in a single season with 26-28. I don't think he's going to do it, but he's got an opportunity to do that. Even so, does Boise State look like the kind of football team that could beat Texas? No. So if Texas wins that game, they get the weakest of the highest-ranked conference champions, which in this case would be BYU. So you play BYU on a neutral site, and I think many of us are going to pick Texas in that game too. So you get that game, and then you get to play the number one team in the country, which at this point is Oregon, but you would get Oregon after they've already had to play a game. So there's that bye week that they get back is now gone, because we don't talk about bye weeks coming weeks later. We talk about the following week. So then you get Texas versus Oregon in a college football playoff semifinal, and you're one win away from playing in the national championship game. So I would love to see in the future either the seeding change up based on the rankings, or that if you're the 1 seed, you get the opportunity to choose. You get to be the number 1 seed and take the week off and get the 8-9 seed, or you get to be the 5 seed and you play the 12 seed right away, but you play 12 seed at home, because I think people are really undervaluing the magnitude of what it's going to mean to get that home game. You think about playing on the road in the SEC, playing on the road in the Big Ten. Imagine that in a postseason environment. You're stuck, dude. Like that is as hostile as it's gonna be, and you're gonna have the wind at your back like you never had it before if you are the 5 seed. Thinking about what A&M was able to pull off against LSU, right? Thinking about Arkansas was able to pull off against Tennessee. Thinking about Vanderbilt, what they were able to pull off against Alabama. Multiply that by 10, and I think that is what you're going to be looking at when you are talking about this really, really great atmosphere of the 5-12 matchup. And I don't envy the 12 seed here. Could it be someone other than Boise State? Yeah, I think Army's got an opportunity to do that. They're undefeated. They get Bryson Daly back. They'll probably be pretty good. But at number 25, that's a tough sell, right, all the way up. To say nothing of what you think of the American Conference, which doesn't look as good as it did with Memphis taking a loss last week. Meanwhile, Southern Methodist is one of those teams that we're not sure what to do with. And the way that the ACC is breaking out, they might not make this thing, as they and A&M are the first 2 teams out of the college football playoff. A&M did it to itself. They were number 1 in the SEC when we're talking about having an opportunity to play in that conference championship. Now we got 5 teams that are tied in the SEC play with 1 loss apiece. If they didn't lose to South Carolina, they wouldn't be one of those teams. They'd be in the top 10, and they'd probably be in the top 5 according to where this committee wants to rank them. But I think the loss to Notre Dame is helpful to them, because Notre Dame has been on a rampage, though Notre Dame also lost to Northern Illinois. And they're looking at being the 10 seed, which I like, which means they got to go on the road. And I like them having to go on the road to play a team that, frankly, they wouldn't want to play anywhere other than an NFL stadium. Because that's the thing about Notre Dame. When they play on the road, it's not always that they play at someone else's facility. Sometimes they play at MetLife. Sometimes they play at Soldier Field. It just depends on what that game is going to look like, because they're independents. They're not ACC members, which is why we have a 17-team league and not an 18-team league. Got this open marriage going. Catholic school got an open marriage going with the ACC. I've always thought that was funny, and I'm going to continue to think it's funny. But I continue to tell you that being the number 5 seed is the best spot. If you can somehow engineer a way to play as the 5 seed, you should. You should. You want the home game before you want the neutral site game. Because the neutral site game is already a place that's far away from your campus. I don't give a damn that it's closer to your campus than the other teams. You want to have that game at your house. You want to have that game at DKR if you're Texas. You want to have that game at Bryant-Denny if you're Alabama. You want to have that game at the Shoe if you're Ohio State. And that's why I think Oregon and Ohio State are in a spot to where they could end up with that 5 seed. So if both of them continue to run the table, let's say Ohio State beats Indiana and Oregon's undefeated, we know that based on what this committee has put down today, that the loser of that game gets the 5 seed. You want to win the Big Ten championship. Everybody wants to win the Big Ten championship, but it's not as if that consolation prize is terrible. That consolation prize is probably the 5 seed, unless you get beat down. If it's a 1-score game or a 2-score game, you probably get the 5 seed. If not, maybe somebody else can slide up into that. Maybe it is the runner-up in the SEC championship, depending on what we think about that team. If it ends up being, say, Georgia and Texas again, I think that's a possibility, right? Especially if Texas is able to win that game. Would you want to keep Georgia in the college football playoff if they take that loss? I think so. I think you're looking at that. I continue to say that these things are going to move. We know that they're going to move. We know that as teams got to play each other, like LSU and Bama, 2 teams that right now would be making the college football playoff barely by winning against each other, you're going to get there. But SMU at 13, Texas A&M at 15, Bama at 11. You just can't afford any slip-ups. That's just not going to happen. Whereas BYU takes an unnecessary loss, I don't think they're going to get in there either, but that also opens the door for a team like Colorado. So there's a lot to prove here. But this is our time, man. November is going to be so much fun, and I'm looking forward to it. I think one of the reasons I'm also looking forward to it is most people would tell you that we got a 4-team race for the Heisman Trophy, right? We've got Cam Ward, who has the closest thing to Patrick Mahomes that we have in the sport, and as far as affecting winning and the playmaking he can have. Dylan Gabriel, who is the most effective passer in the sport, and will probably end this year with the NCAA career passing yards record and the NCAA career passing TDs record. Never mind that he played his 6th year and is quarterbacking the number 1 team in the country. Then you got Ashton Jeanty, who is chasing down Barry Sanders, we hope, right? But is far and away the best tailback in the sport. He's already rushed for more than 1,400 yards, pushed 1,500 yards. He's got a couple of games left where it feels like he can absolutely make a push, but Barry Sanders played 11 games, rushed 2,628 yards. Give him another game, add another 200 yards to that, right? So it's closer to 2,800 that he would have, not 26. That said, Ashton Jeanty at Boise State, also Boise State, group of 5, Barry Sanders, Big 8. It's not really that comparable, but it is fun, right? And he's fun to watch. And as teams have just decided to load the box against him, and as you get tired later in the season, I expect the numbers to go down, and they have. Then you got Travis Hunter. And I don't know why folks like Booger McFarland need to say that Cam Ward is going to win the Heisman Trophy, knowing that Travis Hunter's going both ways. And he will play more than 1,000 snaps this year. He is doing what we have never seen done in the sport, ever. We've seen Patrick Mahomes. We saw him do it at Texas Tech. Maybe you heard about that game with Monday Night Football in Oklahoma, where he went for 734 yards. We've seen record-breaking passers like Dylan Gabriel or Case Keenum, if you want to put it there. We've seen record-breaking running backs like Ashton Jeanty or Barry Sanders. We have never seen someone put up the numbers that Travis Hunter has on either side of the field, right? On an FBS team, I might add, in a Power 4 league, and that affects winning at every level. He is your best defensive player, and I make the argument he's your best offensive player at Colorado. That's not shade to Shedeur Sanders. It's just what Travis Hunter means. And even Shedeur's going, I want Travis to win the Heisman. I know what he has done to do this. I know what he has put himself through. His conditioning is ridiculous. You know, he's running full speed, wide out and corner, and he takes away your best wide receiver threat, which I think is a bigger deal than him being your best wide receiver threat. So you already are having to work to number 2 because Travis Hunter's on the field. And 12 is also going to be open. And when he wants to go, he can go. He had 9 for 153 in the last game he played, right? Then they get the bye week. He can be the first player in modern history to have 1,000 yards receiving, 10 TDs, receiving TDs, and multiple interceptions. We've never seen that before. I believe in honoring what we have never seen before, especially when you're doing it against the best available competition. I realize that you'll tell me that Colorado hasn't really played nobody, and I would say the same thing about Indiana. I would say the same thing about BYU, right? Depending on how you want to feel about Kansas State or SMU. But I would say, show me a Cam Ward who's playing linebacker. Show me a Dylan Gabriel who's playing safety. Show me an Ashton Jeanty who's an edge rusher. You can't. And until you can, honor that Travis Hunter is your best wide receiver, your best corner, and while the Thorpe Award will not give him the Thorpe Award, and I don't believe the Biletnikoff Award, folks, will give him the Biletnikoff Award, the Heisman voters can make sure that everybody knows in 2024, Travis Hunter was the best player in the sport, and then take a look at what he had done in the more than 150 years of this sport being played and compare it to anybody else. His numbers are better than than Charles Woodson's at Michigan. They're better than Chris Gamble's at Ohio State. They're better than Andre Woolfolk's at Oklahoma. The company that he is keeping is quite literally Jim Thorpe. And Thorpe played before we started modernized football and integrated in 1970. And I tend to believe that most football that is played before 1970 shouldn't really count because we didn't have integrated teams. If we did have integrated teams, maybe it'd be different. But as it stands, Jackson State didn't want no part of Texas. Texas didn't want no part of Jackson State. It's just what it was. Texas didn't want no part of FAMU. Texas didn't want no part of Prairie View A&M. I wish they would have. And by the time you got to that space, USC was going to beat up on Bear Bryant's Alabama, and that's how we get here, right? I think that you got to talk about that team and that player in Colorado in that sentence. And you got to give Prime his props. You got to let him know that we appreciate you letting this man play both ways, because not another football coach in the country would allow Travis Hunter to play more than one position. It's just too valuable. Could Jeremiah Smith go both ways? Hell yeah, he could. Could Caleb Downs go both ways? Hell yeah, he could. Are they? No. So honor that is what they are doing. He is playing both ways. He is affecting winning. They're in a spot as one of the 20 best teams in college football to make the college football playoff and to have a road to a national championship for the first time since Darren Hagan and Eric Bieniemy, right? 1990, 1991. I always get them mixed up. The last thing I want to leave y'all with is I want to expand a little bit on a conversation that I have had about James Franklin and John Cooper and Ryan Day. So James Franklin is more in common with John Cooper than Ryan Day does. But if you are an Ohio State fan, you already know this history, and I apologize. If you're not an Ohio State fan, it's important that you know who John Cooper is when they use his name like a slur. So the Nittany Lions in the James Franklin era are 0-5 against the Buckeyes and Wolverines since 2022. He's 1-13 against top 5 opponents. But the Nittany Lions are also 18-0 against all other Big Ten opponents. So they're 0-5 against Ohio State and Michigan, or the teams that have won the Big Ten championship most years in the college football playoff era. He's 1-10 against Ohio State, and Ryan Day is 6-0 against him. So John Cooper arrives at Ohio State and promptly records the first losing season that the Buckeyes had since the 1960s, 22 years in 1988. Then he went to work. 13 years at Ohio State, John Cooper won a share of the Big Ten title 3 times, 1993, 1996, 1998. He finished with a record of 111, 43, and 4. That makes him the second winningest coach in Ohio State history. That's behind Woody Hayes, who's got 205. And you would think, that would matter. You would think that beating Notre Dame in back-to-back seasons, 95, 96, would matter. He also led Ohio State to its first Rose Bowl bid in 13 years and won that game against Arizona State in 1997. You think that would matter. He beat A&M in 1999, the Sugar Bowl. You think that would matter. And he recruited and developed some of the best players of all time, to say nothing of the best players in Ohio State history. We're talking about Heisman winner Eddie George. We're talking about Biletnikoff Award winner Terry Glenn. We're talking about Outland Award winner and Heisman finalist Orlando Pace. We're talking about Butkus Award winner Andy Katzenmoyer. We're talking about Thorpe Award winner Antoine Winfield, whose kid Antoine Winfield Jr. is out still making plays. And since we're here, y'all must have forgot that he also literally brought Alonzo Spellman, Straight Flush and Ahmad Plummer, Mike Vrabel, David Boston, Corey Stringer, and Joey Galloway to the shoe. So why do Ohio State fans hate John Cooper, who's done all this for him? He's 2-10-1 against Michigan. That's why. As the number 5 team in the country in 1995, Ohio State lost to an unranked Michigan, and a win would have got them to their first Rose Bowl in 9 years. And then as the number 2 team in the country, and already assured a bid to the Rose Bowl in 1996, they lost the game in Columbus to a number 21 Michigan. And then Cooper became the first coach to win a Big Ten title and a Rose Bowl at a Pac-10 and Big Ten school at the end of that year. And Ohio State fans say, what that got to do with us? We don't care about none of that. We don't care about what you did at Arizona State. We don't care about what you did at Tulsa. We care about what you're doing for us, and it ain't beating that team up north. 97, Charles Woodson made plays in all 3 phases, offense, defense, special teams, and Michigan famously beats Ohio State 20-14 en route to winning the 1997 national championship. That wasn't enough to fire John Cooper. 1998, Ohio State's ranked number 1 in the country, and then they're upset by Michigan State after starting the season 8-0. They beat Michigan, though, which is great for him. And then a win against A&M in that Sugar Bowl I mentioned, make them the number 2 team in the country. But in 1999, they finished 6-6. Ohio State's 3rd non-winning season since 1947. It's a program that has built a machine on winning. But it was Cooper's 3rd. And at 8-4 year, the next year, just led, and a loss to Michigan, by the way. It was like, all right, we're going to show this future college football Hall of Famer the door, because that's what it means. I think that is where James Franklin is now for Penn State. Penn State fans have had enough. They don't care about winning 9 or 10 games every year if you're going to lose to Ohio State and Michigan every year. They don't care. I don't know who you would go get. I don't even know that that's a move that is going to get made. I am saying that if you feel anguish as a Penn State fan, I understand. I really do. It reminds me a lot of what Oklahoma was going through after winning Big 12 championships, getting to the college football playoff, and routinely getting our heads kicked in. However, nobody at Oklahoma was ready to leave Lincoln Riley, but Lincoln Riley was apparently ready to leave Oklahoma. And so he has. And now he's at USC, where USC is 4-5 and Oklahoma is 5-4, and Oklahoma feels better about their guy than I think most USC fans do right now, even as both of them have changed up their starting quarterback at least once this year, with Lincoln Riley choosing to go to Jaden Mayava against Nebraska. But that's more about trying not to be new Nebraska, while Oklahoma's trying not to be new Nebraska in the SEC. All to say that if you're a Penn State fan, the thing you're going to hold on to is you can finish the season 11-1 and make the college football playoff. And then maybe you get a win, depending on where your seeding is. But if that team you got to play has a 5 or better on their scorecard, you might fold, because that's what James Franklin's teams have done against top 5 teams. Maybe that's the glass half full here, is that you get to the college football playoff and then you overcome that moniker of not being able to win the big game. And mid-game James gets to become big game James, because a lot can change. Get into the college football playoff and you start winning football games. I'm just not sure that is where we're going to end up with them. All right. That is going to do it for tonight's live episode of the #1 college football show, where we are recapping the college football playoff selection committee's initial rankings. We'll see y'all on Saturday after we find out just who is still in this thing: Ole Miss, Georgia, LSU, Alabama, and who is not. And we'll go from there. All right. That's going to do it for me. Deuces.